Good yontif. There is a time for everything, a season for every experience under heaven, a time to be born and a time to die, a time to plant and a time to reap, a time to kill and a time to heal, a time to tear down and a time to build up, a time to weep and a time to laugh, a time to wail and a time to dance, a time to throw stones and a time to gather stones, a time to embrace and a time to resist from embracing, a time to seek and a time to lose, a time to keep and a time to discard, a time to rip and a time to sow, a time to be silent and a time to speak, a time to love and a time to hate, a time for war and a time for peace. This is that season when we read these words from Ecclesiastes, made famous by Pete Seeger and the Birds. They speak to the universal breath of human emotion. There will be times when the most peaceful among us will rage, when the most stoic will weep. We may seem different from one another, with distinct personalities. Some are more outgoing, some more reserved, some more cynical, and some more optimistic, but we are all made up of an enormous variety of experiences and feelings. These verses speak to life's fluidity. They remind us of what we know but so easily forget when we are caught in the grip of emotion. Sunken in the darkness of grief, we can't imagine dancing. But as long as we are breathing, that moment will in fact come. Such is the nature of being alive. And yet, for all its wisdom, Ecclesiastes' world still sounds so orderly, as if the messiness, the predictable unpredictability of being human could be scheduled, as if our emotions waited politely for their appointed time. This year makes that seem especially impossible. These days of Sukkot are called Zman Simchotenu, the season of our joy. We are commanded to feel joy, to enact joy, to rejoice. But how can we? How can we speak of joy on October 7th? 2 years of torment since that day of horror and devastation when lives were stolen and destroyed, families torn apart, faith in safety and decency shaken to its core. How can we talk about joy when grief still runs so deep, when people still remain in the clutches of captivity? When bloodshed and destruction continue to be met with more bloodshed and destruction, how can we feel joy trapped in this season of suffering? The overlap of these days, the commandment to rejoice and the weight of remembrance, is exactly the tension Ecclesiastes hints to but cannot reconcile. But Yehuda Amichai, Israel's best-loved poet, makes sense of this tension not by resolving it, but by simply reminding us that we live it. Amichai states it clearly. We don't exist in neatly bounded seasons, but in the overlap, amidst the chaos of contradiction. He writes, "A man doesn't have time in his life to have time for everything. He doesn't have seasons enough to have a season for every purpose." Ecclesiastes was wrong about that. A man needs to love and to rage at the same moment, to laugh and cry with the same eyes. with the same hands to throw stones and to gather them, to make love in war and war in love, and to hate and forgive and remember and forget and arrange and confuse, to eat and to digest what history takes years and years to do. What Amichai names so beautifully and powerfully in this poem, he embodied as a poet and as a human being. The refusal to separate what life itself keeps intertwined. He was a secularist who sang in the language of sacred texts. His love for the Jewish people was as visceral and true as his frustration with them. His deep connection to Israel as home sings out most poignantly in verses expressing haunting estrangement as he walks the streets of Jerusalem. He constantly engaged with the God he refused to believe in. He fought in 3 wars and watched friends fall beside him. His restless, relentless obsession with peace was born in and bound to that devastation. Amichai gives poetic voice to what Ecclesiastes set down in words centuries before he lived. Turning back to those ancient words of the text we read, it is better to go to a house of mourning than to go to a house of feasting. For that is the end of all people, and the living will take it to heart. It's an unsettling verse. But Ecclesiastes isn't glorifying death or urging us towards sorrow over joy. Ecclesiastes is teaching that in the house of mourning, we encounter a truth we can't find anywhere else. A clarity that pierces our illusions of control and permanence. Brushing up against mortality opens us to an awareness that makes life feel more vivid, more precious. When we come close to life's edges, illness, loss, sudden change, the noise around us quiets, the trivial fades, and what matters most comes sharply into view. We remember that our time is finite and that every breath, every bond of love is a gift to savor. The rabbis of Ecclesiastes Rabbah understood this. Commenting on this text, they ask, why is it better to go to a house of mourning? And then, as they do, they answer their own question. Because the heart of the wise is there. Those who allow themselves to mourn, they taught, are the very ones who God brings to joy, as it is written, the humble will increase their joy in the eternal. They understood what we know, that when we enter a house of mourning, we are moved to tears, and we are also part of the comfort of community. That we embrace our loved ones in their sorrow, and they lift us up by sharing memories of the one who they are grieving. Our rabbis understood this deeply. They weren't speaking of joy instead of grief, or even joy after grief, but joy that arises through that ability to be vulnerable, to feel, from loving deeply enough to ache, from recognizing that what we hold most dear is both fragile and enduring, from being honest about what is living in us, the entire range of whatever we are feeling at that time. This is what makes the human heart extraordinary. Even in its breaking, it expands. The same love that brings us to tears is what makes laughter possible. It is that love that inspires us to mark loss by blessing the Torah. Judaism has never treated joy as something simple. The very fact that Hebrew has so many words for it tells us that joy in our tradition is a sacred state of being, one with many shades and depths. Here are just a few examples. There are many more. Sasson is the bright gladness that comes with good news. Gil is the joy that can't be contained, spontaneous, physical, alive in the body. Rina is joy that becomes song, an outward public expression of praise, sometimes a private expression of joyful longing. Oneg is the gentle delight of contentment, the sweetness of Shabbat peace. But simcha, the word that defines this season of Sukkot, that is something deeper. It's not about pleasure or excitement, but about wholeness, fullness. Simcha is the joy that arises when life, in all its contradictions, comes into focus. The joy that stands with sorrow, that deepens rather than denies it. The joy of being bound to love, to meaning, to hope, to prayers for peace, to God. Leon Wieseltier once wrote, Amichai is like a juggler who manages to keep the big, dangerous, awkward chainsaws, God, Judaism, Israel, Holocaust, war, sex, and love, always in the air. The miracle is not that he doesn't get hurt, he does, but that he always goes on. I love that insight. It isn't that Amichai doesn't get hurt. He does, but he always goes on. But I think Wieseltier is missing a little bit of what makes Amichai and Ecclesiastes so enduring. These moments, these issues, these emotions, these experiences are not objects that we juggle at a distance. They are not external from us. They live inside us. They shape the contours of who we are, constructing our very identities. Every day, we carry the full weight and wonder of being human, with all of it at once. Sukkot, by its very nature, lifts up this marvelous complexity so that we might stop trying to live otherwise, to stop feeling guilty for our laughter in times of pain, for the ache that lingers even in moments of celebration, to stop imagining that wholeness means choosing one feeling over another. Sukkot teaches that holiness is not found in purity of emotion, but in the coexistence of it all, the messy, magnificent mixture of being alive, especially in the shadow and knowledge of death. Today is both an ancient festival of sacred rejoicing and a day of modern trauma that will forever bear our deepest sorrow. Amidst it all, we build and we shiver, we feast and we mourn, we bless, we live. Amen.